today, Brett, we're gonna start off with an article by Brian Korstad from InsideMNSoccer.com, Minnesota Soccer. And Brian has a really interesting two-part article on his website called "Integrating MLS Reserve Leagues into America's Lower Divisions." And basically, what he's talking about here is the whole concept that the MLS reserves would be better off in some way, or the concept in general, of them playing in the lower divisions, i.e. USL or NASL, integrating those teams into either one of those lower divisions, almost like, you have Barcelona B, or, there are lots of teams in Europe that have B teams. Now, somebody made a distinction, actually, Brett, and I think it was Andy Mead, who said there is a distinction, however, between a reserve team and a, Barcelona B is not the Barcelona reserves. Those are different things, for starters. But the interesting thing about this article is the USL and Tim Holt from USL and David Downs from NASL have very different perspectives on this. Tim Holt is very open to the idea, while David Downs is saying, listen, I think it's an interesting concept. We're talking about it, but we want to preserve our own brand. We don't want to be seen as MLS Reserve League. We're the NASL, and we want to build and grow. I know you read the article. What were some of your thoughts on either perspective?
Well, I can truly understand NASL's standpoint. They don't want, obviously, they don't want to be deemed a farm league. However, until the day that MLS absolutely fails, NASL and USL truly will be more or less farm leagues. But it's not being treated like that at this point. I see this as a positive for both leagues, whether it be MLS and NASL or MLS and USL, or maybe even all three. There are some positives as long as it works for both parties. In all honesty, I see that this being an increase in attendance. Most NASL teams, hit roughly around the 4K, 5K at tops, and teetering all the way down to under 1,000 in some instances. I'm not saying that this is going to skyrocket their attendance numbers by any means, but an extra 1,000 a game for whenever MLS teams come in, because you will see some decent players that actually get MLS playing time in these reserve games. Let's just take a team like Chicago as an example, because again, this is my expertise. You look at it, even at the striker level, you have Kelly Dubé, who's played a number of years with New England Revolution, who will ultimately be a reserve player for the Fire, basically coming in as a sub option at most. You have a under 20 Israeli striker in Orbarush. In this year, we might actually see Nyarko even be relegated to the bench. Who knows? It's very possible that we have, you'll see teams with very high quality players playing for the reserve team. And if it were to start right now, you'd see Carolina Railhawks versus an MLS team like DC United or New York Red Bulls or New England
reserves.
And the reserves, yes, I agree. I'm saying that you're still bringing in a quality team, and if anything, at least at equal levels of these NASL and USL top teams.
But you see the problem with that, and I think Andy Mead makes a good point. At least he did on Facebook when we had this discussion with Brian, which was this. There is a difference between a B team, like Barcelona B, and Barcelona reserves, i.e., you don't want Dubé to be traveling all over the country on the B team when you're going to need him on occasion, or maybe more than you think, on the A team. So if you turn the reserves into Fire B, and they end up playing in the USL, and they're going to have a totally different schedule. They're going to be playing all over the country, or at least regionally, maybe in places that don't make it easy for him to travel back to the Fire in case they need him for, the back or the bench, or to come off the bench, after halftime. So you have to. There's things that need to happen, obviously, to make this happen. One of those things is you really need to expand the rosters dramatically, I think, because listen, you're talking about these teams that play CONCACAF Champions League, then they're also playing U.S. Open, then they're also playing MLS. Those teams were dead tired. I mean, at the end of the season, dead tired. A team like Seattle, they had to be exhausted. And now you're going to ask them to maybe also have a B team. And the only way to do that is you have to increase the pool of players on Seattle to make that happen, right? I mean, that's the only sane way of doing this.
Well, yes, and looking at it from an MLS standpoint, let's just say the teams add an additional 10 players. They're already paying for the first 30, all right? So they're already paying for the first team plus a quote-unquote reserves team as is. If we add an additional 10 players at the bare minimum rate of even a developmental contract, that's an additional, $320,000 at most? Mm-hmm. I mean, or at the very most, you're looking at a top of the table of about an extra $400,000.
But wouldn't
it's an investment, and that's something that he talks about in his article. It's an investment that MLS really has to look into. Not only that, but they have to invest in the travel itself. Which, unless the league becomes regionalized with all the teams, maybe, but even if it's regionalized, there's still that whole travel cost. So there is an investment included to this MLS, but it's really to improve the league as a whole, as well as improving the lower leagues.
But wouldn't those 10 players theoretically, a lot of them, be playing in the USL or NASL anyhow?
That's very true. I mean, it just depends. I mean, you look at a player. If you have an option between playing for an MLS reserve team, playing in an NASL, or an NASL team, I mean, you're obviously probably want to teeter towards the MLS team because it's probably going to be an easier route towards an actual first division start in comparison to staying with the NASL team.
Maybe. I mean, theoretically. Now, if I'm Tim Holt and I'm the USL, and I've dropped from the second division down to the third division, so I don't have to.
They dropped themselves there.
Sure, they did. They did it on purpose because they couldn't live up to all the the specifications and the requirements necessary to be a Division II team. And of course, the NASL stepped up and said, "Well, we will meet those expectations." Now, if I'm Tim Holt from the USL and I'm looking at being the third division in this country, then I am nervous about survival. I am nervous about success, and for me, it makes a lot of sense for them to tie their league into the MLS because it's a kind of and become sort of MLS, AAA, if you will, because it allows them with that partnership some stability, some survivability. But if you're NASL and you're David Downs, the commissioner, and you're trying to build your own brand, to maybe somewhere down the line, I mean, this is a vision, of course. You're looking at 10, 15 years down the line, maybe even 5 if you really work hard at it, and your clubs are all building soccer-specific stadiums, say like the new teams, like the San Antonio, Scorpions. Then, what you're looking at is maybe eventually competing at some level with MLS, hopefully. And, of course, maybe that's a pipe dream. A lot of people would consider that a pipe dream. But that's what David Downs is saying in a lot of ways. I'm not, and I do not want to, destroy my brand. I want to build my brand. I want to bring in players. I want to make NASL strong. I want the NASL teams to buy better players, become a better league, and maybe down the line, who knows, we'll compete with MLS, and somebody's going to have to recognize our league. And I think I understand David Downs' position, and I actually agree with him. I would not take this deal. I don't think it makes sense to become MLS Reserve League team for MLS. And, of course, MLS would love that. They would love for both bottom divisions to just suck it up. And in fact, there was a great quote here from Will Coons, and he says the following. When you talk about NHL or Major League Baseball model of sort of having farm teams, those relationships have been established for such a long time that the second and third division clubs have accepted the role and take a lot of pride in being somewhere where a future major league star could be playing. I think we are starting to see our MLS clubs do the same thing in taking pride in the players who they send to Europe, yeah, right, and list them as accomplishments of the club, because that shows that this club can identify and develop American talent, maybe even local talent. Obviously, we're trying to catch up in MLS to the rest of the world and on the field, but we're not there yet. Until we get there, I think our clubs are sort of setting that model of developing a player. Yeah, right. And what he's basically saying here, and I don't believe a word he is saying, because MLS is so reluctant to let go of their stars. I mean, they've got a stranglehold like you wouldn't believe, and yet that's what he's saying. Well, we're taking pride in that. I think that's a bunch of poo-hoo. But what he's saying here is, I want NASL and USL to start feeling the same way about us. That's what he's saying there, right?
Well, you know, MLS has shown that they're willing to sell as long as they meet their market standards, not the actual world market standards. They've sold players in the past. They're just not willing to sell their players for peanuts, and that's a whole different story to really get into. But yes, I do agree with you on the fact that that is a kind of a sketchy comment, because they're not willing to just release players in hopes like let's use Agudelo. They wouldn't just sell Agudelo abroad for $500,000 in hopes that he turns out to be the superstar and say, hey, look at that. We trained and developed that. That's us.
Right.
No, that's not going to happen. But again, another topic for another day. Mm-hmm. You know, the way I look at this is that USL is showing immense eagerness. Like you mentioned, they're looking at this as a form of stability. You know, USL of the past has known teams to enter one year just to go out of business next year.
Yep.
You know, and they are looking at this as, hey, this is our way of finding some form of stability and growing from there maybe. Mm-hmm. You know, basically some of the comments that I mentioned earlier, seeing increase in attendance, seeing increase in development, seeing this and that. You know, you incorporate with MLS, you're going to be working, as long as it's a working group there. They work together.
Partnership, yeah.
MLS to bring their sponsors abroad. You know, they'll see that they'll bring their kit, possible cheaper kit sponsors, TV sponsors, just generic sponsorships. Of course, this is all hypothetical. This is assuming that it is a working partnership. But if NASL basically spurns this opportunity, and I say opportunity loosely because I do agree that it has to work for both parties. It can't just work for MLS and be done with it, because that's not any business model should not be based on that.
Well, USLs, they're the ones that are desperate to make this happen.
That's what I'm saying. If NASL spurn this and USL jumps on board and takes over, it's no longer an idea of NASL really hoping to compete with MLS. It's coming to the point where NASL really has to worry about competing with USL, because if you're an owner, if you're a potential soccer team owner for a lower division team, say if Indianapolis went out and wanted to get a team that's not an MLS.
Well, that's very possible, actually.
Or they want a USL team. Yeah. They look at this, and they're saying, well, let's see, NASL is a Division II team. They have these perks. There's 9 teams. They have to have 8 in order to even be sanctioned. USL is partnered with MLS. There are 40-some-odd teams in this division. Which one has more stability if you're looking at the long term? You're going to be looking towards USL for that matter.
Well, again, that depends on your vision for the future. And it depends on whether you're David Downs or you're Tim Holt, right?